I'm Betsy Eaves, currently serving at Grace Community United Methodist Church in Shreveport. I never intended to become a pastor. I grew up a Methodist preacher's kid in the Memphis Conference, and I loved the church, but I wasn't looking or expecting to be a pastor like my father was. I think it probably began with a series of events that I have come to say were odd, or God are so odd they must have been God. Probably began in 1975 when I was reading Leslie Weatherhead's The Will of God that summer, and my life intersected with some folks like Benny Vaughn and Dave Stone and Jim Moore and D.L. Dykes. And in a whirlwind of crazy circumstances, ended up as a college student going on staff at First Church in Shreveport and becoming part of those first classes of what was then the Church Careers Program at Centenary. When after graduation, I still was, I don't know if I was resisting or just looking elsewhere, not paying attention to that pastoral call. My life was a tapestry of marriage and motherhood and part-time ministry opportunities. And every time it would come up, I sort of boldly told God, I'm busy and I'm going to raise these children. And if you really want to talk to me about this, then talk to me when they're grown. So is it another series of odd or God, or maybe so odd it must have been God experiences and circumstances that in 2002, when our youngest graduated from high school, incredible, unbelievable opportunities opened up that allowed me to move from ministry with college students as a layperson into ministry as a pastor, as the chaplain at Centenary, and directing the very program that had formed me, and being part of what had seemed impossible, developing relationships with seminaries that brought seminary education to North Louisiana in new ways. And lo and behold, there I was living into ministry as a pastor that I don't know if I ran from it, but I just kept trying to make it go my way. And so several lessons. God is patient, and be careful about making deals with God, because God has a good memory, and ultimately what I learned was the blessing of just saying yes, even when you can't see the how, and you can't see the map, and you can't see the way. The blessing of living into who I ultimately felt like I was born to be. And those of you who know me know I'm a strong-willed person, and sometimes just think I know, and God always knows better. So it was a journey that was woven with lots of folks. It ultimately was a journey that took me through 11 years of chaplain at Centenary, and then ministry at Grace Community at St. Luke's in Shreveport, and back to Grace. There are lots of precious memories. Gosh, it's so hard to choose and to choose from those moments, when a lot of moments when I looked into the eyes of people in special times. But the story I'll tell is the story of Devin. Devin was a special young adult who connected with St. Luke's in Shreveport when I was the pastor there. He rode his bike to church on Sundays and rode his bike back on Monday evenings to be part of the young adult group. And everyone embraced Devin. And Devin loved being part of St. Luke's and part of our community. One Sunday morning, I was preaching. Devin was sitting probably 5 or 6 pews back where he normally did, close to the aisle. And it was during the Me Too movement, the height of the Me Too movement, when women were speaking up and speaking out and being very vulnerable. And I was watching the heartbreak of what was happening on social media, where people were bashing women they had never met, whose story they had never engaged. And in that sermon on that Sunday morning, I was raising the question, what is the message we as the church are going to send in times like these? How are we going to be understood as what it means to be followers of the way of Jesus when vulnerable folks are sharing their stories? And I was heartbroken by some of what I was seeing on social media. And I began to ask the question of my congregation, what is the message you want to send? And I began to name names of our children and our youth. What are they going to hear from you? Because they're watching and they're listening to everything you're saying and everything that you're posting. And what's the message? And I began to say, what do you want to say if the unimaginable happens to our children and our youth, and they are listening for how you will stand with them? Do you want to say, don't dare? Do you want to send a message that it's not safe for them to speak up and speak out? Or are you going to stand with them? Will you stand with Ava if Ava stands up and says, I need you? Will you stand with Jennifer if Jennifer says, I need you and I am hurting? Will you stand with me if I speak up at some point in my life and say, I need you? Will you stand with us? And as I was speaking, Devin got up from his pew in the middle of my sermon, walked to me, wrapped his arms around me, and spoke into my ear, I will stand with you. Devin preached the sermon that day. I simply asked the questions. And that was one of those moments when it was reinforced for me that truthfully, what we do in this business is not come to the table with the answers. Our job is to hold the space at a big table to invite everyone in and to ask the questions, because the answers of God's love are already there in God's people. And our job is to hold the space and ask the questions so that the Spirit moves. And Devin taught all of us that day what it means to be a follower of the way of Jesus, to say to the hurting and the marginalized, I will stand with you. It's true, there are so many to be thankful for. First and foremost, of course, my husband, who used to say, I didn't sign up to be a preacher's wife. And yet, when I approached my children and my husband about going into ordained ministry, their response was, yeah. The people around me, I think, who claimed my role as pastor even before I claimed it. And so certainly thankful to Clay for just putting up with what that has meant for our lives and for his life, and the support of his support and the support of our children and grandchildren. Have grandchildren who watch online from Austin and from Baltimore, and certainly my friends, particularly Beth Hedgecock, who also claimed me as pastor before I claimed it myself. But I am also so grateful for people who throughout my ministry have been willing to think outside the box, have been willing to take a chance on me, and especially those gracious enough to forgive me when I get it wrong, because when we're taking chances, we get it wrong sometimes. And when we're being human, we get it wrong sometimes. So to all of those people, and you know who you are. Those people who, I really want to highlight those people who are willing to think outside the box, because without those people, without people like Ken Swab and Bishop Hutchinson and William Peoples, I wouldn't have been and couldn't have been Centenary's chaplain at the time that I was. We broke out of the box for that to even be possible. Without places like Garrett Evangelical in 2002 and 2003, who were willing to think outside the box, we couldn't have brought Distance Theological Seminary to North Louisiana before there were online seminary options. Without people willing to do new things and think outside the box, St. Luke's Shreveport would not have taken a chance on developing the low-key service and the Amore recovery ministry without people willing to invest in new ways of doing things. We wouldn't have been able to restructure what became the Christian Leadership Center at Centenary without imagining new ways of being church. Grace wouldn't be a reconciling congregation and be currently engaged in exploring repurposing our facilities to look at new ways of being church. So I want to say thank you to all of you who, even when we don't have the whole map, are willing to celebrate the gifts that you see in people, provide opportunities for people, maybe when it doesn't always follow in the path the way we've always done it, and to step into an unknown future that God often imagines before we can. Thank you to Bishop Harvey and to the Louisiana Conference, and to all the people who have taken a chance on me, but also who continue to take a chance on people and create opportunities to try new things, to step into a future, to break into new ways of being church. Thank you all.